Do fandoms ruin franchises more than studios do? That's kind of what I wanted to talk about today because I heard this question and it got me really interested in the topic. And I wanted to bring this to my channel and give you guys an outlet to talk about it too in my comments. Maybe we can debate. But I'm going to say, if you want the brief summary before I get into everything, I'm going to say yes for certain franchise. I think it does depend on the franchise. I don't think it's like a blanket term you can apply to all franchises because I guess any fandom could ruin any franchise if they get bad enough. But there's just certain fandoms that are so bad for certain franchises that it's literally almost more toxic than a toxic studio that just cuts every movie to oblivion or requires rewrites for everything or refuses to give the fans what they want. And that's what you can argue for this is that maybe these two things go hand in hand, studios and fandoms creating, the monster per se. Because I genuinely believe that toxic fandoms can exist without a toxic studio, but I think a toxic fandom can create a toxic studio. When you have a fandom that is nothing but negative, nothing but toxic, I think it kind of makes the studio retaliate a bit, or at least get a little bit vendative. And it kind of makes them want to not give the fans what they want. However, on the other side of the coin, you have studios that refuse to give the fans what they want, no matter how, loyal and trusting the fan base is. And at a certain point, you ruin that trust, you ruin that loyalty, and you get people like, I'm not saying it's okay, but you get people sending death threats and shit and going crazy. It kind of makes sense on how you get from point A to point B. That being said, I don't agree with it, obviously, at all. I think if you let a franchise, even if it's one you love, if you let a franchise get to the point where you're sending death threats, or if you're threatening actors, or just being a nuisance, honestly, on social media in general, you might need to, honestly reevaluate some shit, because it's just not worth it. It's really not. I've had some franchises that I love ruined. For example, I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan, but I am a Star Wars fan, and that's been, in my opinion, ruined. I just kind of walked away. Same with the DC EU. I loved that. Well, I loved the start of it, and then that slowly got ruined, and I walked away, and now it's taking me some convincing to come back to DC. Granted, they have new leadership, but my faith has been so, scorned and ruined that it's hard for me to come back to that. So that definitely does happen. And I think that's the best route you can go. I'm not saying it's always best to just give up on the franchise. You should voice your concerns as a fan, because us as fans are what makes these companies. This is what people need to realize is voting with your wallet is a huge thing, and it could be a huge factor in getting what you want. And it's not about strong arming these people or these places, but voting with your wallet is important. If you don't like something, stop buying it. Stop paying to go see it. Stop subscribing to it. It's, I've had to come to this realization on my own, and it took me surprisingly long. So that's why I'm not super harsh when people just don't grasp the concept, because it is easier said than done. In the grand scheme of things, especially after you do it, you're like, oh yeah, naturally, that's what you should do. But when you're in the moment, you justify it. It's kind of like a toxic relationship. You justify all these bad things the person does, or that the company does in this matter, and you just excuse it as it's a rough patch, but it'll get better. They've done good by me before, so it'll get better, and it never really does. I've had to do this with things like, Netflix. I stopped subscribing because, actually, I should say I resubscribed for Stranger Things 5, but I stopped subscribing for a while just because they stopped putting out content that I enjoyed. I just didn't like it. It's the same with HBO. Again, recently they have some stuff that's kind of lulling me back into maybe subscribing, like It or The Penguin. But with that being said, I still haven't done it because, like I said, it's hard to kind of return to something that has done you dirty before. And that's where I think this debate is interesting, because like most debates, I think you can argue most debates, there's no real clear-cut correct answer unless it's like a actual moral debate where it's like, is this right or is this wrong? Most of the times there's an objective right and an objective wrong. But in this scenario, I think it's one of those things like the chicken or the egg, like which came first, like sure, toxic fandoms can create toxic studios, but toxic studios create toxic fandoms, like Star Wars. I would argue that Star Wars had one of the best fan bases in pop culture until a certain point, and then when the prequels started rolling out, that's when I saw the tide kind of change. Now, I was young when those were coming out, but looking back on everything, looking back on the reception, seeing that Jake Lloyd and Hayden Christensen were getting death threats, it's fucking Star Wars, okay? I mean, I understand we all love this stuff, but let's come back to reality. It's Star Wars. Nobody deserves to die, even if their portrayal was bad, which I would argue that it's not, but that's a whole other video. Even if it was bad, nobody deserves to die over a bad fucking performance. Okay, yeah, you spent your money on a movie ticket, you didn't like it. That happens. It's like a bad meal. It does happen. Now, it's your choice to keep doing that. Now, if you go see the other two and you expect things to change, or even the other one, that's kind of on you. I don't really know what to tell you. That doesn't give you the right to just be a dick and honestly kind of a psychopath. Now, as I mentioned before, I will also say, like, studios that will literally go out of their way to not listen to fans. I'm looking at you, Sony, in particular. Sony could literally print money if they wanted to by just giving fans what they want. For example, having 3 individual Spider-Men at the same time, in my opinion, would be a good idea. Giving Tobey a 4th movie, giving Andrew a 3rd and final movie to his what should have been trilogy, and continuing Tom's story is not that hard. Number 1, Sony has the money. Number 2, they have the ability to do it. They own the rights to Spider-Man. Number 3, I don't think it would confuse audiences because the people that would be going to see those are the people that would never be confused by that. Now, if this were just general audiences, maybe people would be confused, but I think people are also smart enough to know, okay, this is a different guy. So this probably isn't the same Spider-Man as the one that showed up in Iron Man. I don't know. That's just a hunch, but, what do I know? Or even, like I made that video on their villain universe, but if they would have just included Spider-Man in that, hell, maybe even make it Andrew's universe. If they would have just done that, it would have been genius because, again, you would print money. I think depending on the project, like if you have a Craven versus Spider-Man movie to finish out that universe and Andrew's Spider-Man ends up dying, that's sick. People would love that. It would probably make $1 billion. Give him the black suit, go crazy. But, they don't do that. And that's what's frustrating, I think, to a lot of fans. And I could totally get the frustration. However, I just don't think it's worth all of the toxicity. So, like I've already stated in this video multiple times, I do think that, it's a double-sided coin. I don't think there's one straight answer here. I think it does depend on the franchise. I think Star Wars did ruin the fandom, and then in turn, the fandom continues to ruin the franchise, which is just very ironic. I think Sony also ruined they haven't ruined it because there is still a lot of love for Spider-Man, but they've definitely tainted the fandom, especially when it comes to the villains. Because imagine that's, people's first experiences with the villains. Imagine a 10-year-old kid is going to the movies to see Morbius. Do you think he's ever going to show interest in Morbius again? It's kind of like when Halle Berry's Catwoman came out. I feel like that did so much damage for the character that even when Anne Hathaway showed up in The Dark Knight Rises, it was still kind of like people didn't really care too much. I mean, there's people that cared, but it wasn't like a huge thing. And now with Zoe Saldana, I feel like people have kind of fully come around to her as a character, but it took a minute to come back from that. And same with Hayden Christensen. Yeah, the fan base has kind of gotten better, but still, the Star Wars fan base is toxic. There's nothing wrong with not liking what your favorite franchise is putting out, but it's how you react and it's how you handle that. And like I said, it's also about, like, sometimes just walk away. It's not worth it. But that's just my opinion. Again, I'm not saying I'm the authority on this. It's just my thoughts. So I want to hear what you guys have to say down below. Let me know what you think. Which fandom do you think is the absolute worst? Which one do you think is the absolute best? For me, I'd say some of the best fandoms have to be Avatar: Last Airbender, maybe the MCU, in terms of like loyalty and also just like commitment, especially the ones that are truly committed and they watch like everything. One that shows promise is the DCU fandom. However, I will say like this one is kind of in the middle for me because I've also seen a lot of toxicity similar to the DCEU fandom. The DCEU obviously had a ton of toxicity with like the Snyder cult and stuff. But I will say, I mean, the new DCU fandom doesn't really seem much better because I've seen a lot of people just give fair criticisms on stuff and get literally attacked personally and meant like in every which way possible. And again, it's just, in my opinion, that's never okay because even if you don't agree, it's just uncalled for. It's like we can agree to disagree and still be, normal humans, like decent human beings. And as I mentioned, I think some of the worst fandoms are Star Wars for sure. Granted, they've made some progress, but still, I just keep going back to them. I really cannot help it. And honestly, Rick and Morty, it's kind of a more niche one. I feel like at this point, obviously Rick and Morty was a big show, but I feel like you don't really hear much about it. But I just remember me personally, that fandom, like ruining my enjoyment for that show for me. But again, just my thoughts. I'd love to know what you guys think down below. If you stuck around this long, I do appreciate it. I value your time, so it means a lot. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video.